All right. Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining the UI Peeps Masterclass. So today we basically have Jason Strickland, who is the lead UX UI designer over at Treyarch, and he's going to give us basically a talk regarding his process and his experience working at Treyarch. Yeah, so Jason, it's all yours, my friend.
Oh, thanks, Stefan, and thanks for hosting me today. I'm excited to be here. One thing I do want to mention is I have a little Yorkshire Terrier dog, and he's got a mind of his own, so he might start barking loudly at points. But my partner, they'll take him for a walk or something like that if he starts to get too out of control. But I just wanted to mention that. Cool. I'm gonna share my screen.
Go for it.
See. Okay, so we got that. And then I'm gonna switch over to here. Okay, can everyone see the presentation?
Yes.
Great. And also, Stefan, I wanted to mention that I only have two monitors, so um, I can't see everyone on camera. So if anyone raises their hand, could you let me know or has questions during? We will have a Q&A at the end, but in case anything comes up during, I can't see, so just chime in and let me know.
Will do. Thank you for letting me know.
Awesome. So let me just do this real quick. Get into my, there we go. Okay. Hi, my name is Jason Strickland. I am a lead UX designer at Treyarch working on the Call of Duty franchise. Um, Unfortunately, I have a little bit of legal to discuss. Unfortunately, I cannot specifically share any UX work that I have done at Treyarch on Call of Duty for legal reasons. However, I still think that there's some useful information to take away from this presentation regarding large-scale AAA development. Want to talk a little bit about sort of the hierarchy at Treyarch. I'm one of many leads across the many studios that work on Call of Duty. The leads generally work under the UX directors, of which there are also several across the many studios. Call of Duty is an effort of multiple studios collaborating with hundreds of folks contributing. At Treyarch, for example, we have one UX director, two UX leads, one tech UX lead, four UX designers, four UI artists, and two tech UI UX designers. On this chart, I left the tech UI UX off. They kind of work in parallel on the side on their own and report to the UX director, but they tend to work on more the technical aspects, tools development, and things like that. Additionally, during a project, um, we take on designers and artists from other Activision studios that help contribute during a ship year, and vice versa. If Sledgehammer Games or Infinity Ward is on their ship year, we might at Treyarch contribute to help develop out some features and get it ready for ship. I'll talk a little bit about my background and how I ended up here. I've been working in gaming for about 20 years now. I studied traditional hand-drawn animation and graphic design from the University of the Arts in Philadelphia. And afterwards, I moved to California from New Jersey to pursue a dream of working in the video game industry. I had originally started my career as a character animator, and I did that for several years at various studios. I worked at EA for a little while and some Activision studios. I was a character animator on the Sims franchise for a couple titles. I wasn't a very good animator. I was good enough that I could complete my assignments, but I always felt like it was a real struggle for me. Um, After a few years of working as a struggling animator, I was in between contracts and had come across a UX design position at a local startup company called Playdom in Palo Alto, which later got acquired by Disney, and we became Disney Interactive. Before moving to California, I worked briefly as a graphic designer for AT&T. It wasn't the most exciting job, but it paid the bills and got me familiar with working in like a really large corporate environment. Um, I had enough design samples in my portfolio where I felt comfortable to apply for the UI position at Playdom, and I got my first job in UI UX shortly after. I worked on social games for several years and then transitioned into mobile game development. After that, I did a little stint in VR before settling into the AAA gaming space at Treyarch. I've been at Treyarch now for 6 years and have worked in some capacity on the last 6 Call of Duty titles dating back to Cold War. Like I said before, it's not uncommon for the COD studios to share resources and help on upcoming releases since Call of Duty is an annual game and launch always feels like it's right around the corner. On this slide, it's sort of a breakdown of my contributions and to which titles. So in Cold War, I worked, that was a Treyarch title. I worked primarily on Combat Record and Zombies. In Vanguard, that was a Sledgehammer Games development. I worked on Zombies for that. Modern Warfare 2 was Infinity Ward. I contributed to Social. Modern Warfare 3 was, again, Sledgehammer Games. I worked on the MWZ game mode for that. And then Black Ops 6 and Black Ops 7 were both Treyarchs, and I did contribute to Zombies Endgame and Call of Duty HQ Refactor. I want to talk a little bit about transitioning into AAA game development. I sort of transitioned into AAA a little bit later in my career, having done social and mobile earlier on. And I'd come into Treyarch with a fair bit of experience, having worked as both a director and a lead at prior companies. When I came in as a senior UX designer. I feel like sometimes you need to take a few steps back before you can move forward. Call of Duty is a largely successful franchise, and the teams working on the games are quite large, and everybody on the team is uniquely talented. My approach to the first year was to actively contribute, but largely I just wanted to learn and understand how the teams all work together and how to interact with different disciplines and collaborate. Your first year at any company is usually spent getting the lay of the land, learning how to work with the team, and learning the pipelines. I think it's a good strategy to do this regardless of title when entering a new company. Every team, every company has different ways of working. What worked at one place might not work well for another. It's a good idea to assess how the different disciplines and production function and take some time to assess the areas you can add value and other areas where you might be deficient and able to learn. One of the biggest changes for me coming into Treyarch was having the ability to focus only on UX. In the past, most of my career had been hybrid UI UX roles where you're expected to do both. You're expected to do the UX and also the finished shippable UI art. Sometimes these two things can be at odds with one another, so I appreciate being able to pick a lane and stay in it. UX requires a lot of iteration and throwing out work and starting new ideas when it's not working. Sometimes that's hard to do when you have spent large chunks of time creating the art. We try to iterate and fail fast on the UX side, and I found focusing only on the UX to be a nice change for me personally. I want to also mention that it can be hard at times to feel a sense of ownership in such a large production like Call of Duty. There are many stakeholders and developers collaborating to make this product the best that it can be. So my advice, if you work in AAA, is to find a feature or a mode that may interest you and really try and focus on those. It's impossible as a designer to have full ownership over the whole game, so it's good to find parts of the game that interest you and really hone in on delivering those features to a high standard while taking the opportunity to interject some of your own ideas in the process. I'm going to talk a little bit now about my UX process and sort of how that works with how we develop features at Treyarch. At the start of a feature development, we usually have a feature kickoff with various stakeholders on the project. Usually it's a systems designer or one of the design directors will walk the team through the design at a systems level. The designer might have a UI requirements section in their document where they identify the UI UX needs for this feature. This can be a helpful starting point, but it usually doesn't contain everything that we will need. So afterwards, I'll take the documentation and read through it again, and I'll note any additional needs on the UI UX side. At this point, it's maybe a good, a good idea to start gathering some reference, start brewing some ideas in your head, and thinking of some avenues you'd like to explore. I'm going to walk through an exercise here with my process, but I'm going to sort of talk through how I would approach a crafting table UI UX for a survival horror game. I usually start blocking in or gray boxing, fairly rough. I might just start mapping out the screen space with rough shapes and trying to find interesting layout or start feeling out the potential visual hierarchy of everything. I work really rough in this phase and really loose. The little, this is supposed to be a person over here on the right and over the shoulder back view. So as you can see, I'll work extremely loose at this stage. I'll normally spend quite a bit of time doing different layouts, and it's funny, like I'll think I'm onto something and I'll make one little nudge and then it'll send me in a completely different direction because I see something I like. And this is sort of my favorite part of the whole design process because it just feels like you're doing, you're an explorer trying to find treasure in a way. And it gets really exciting when you feel like you found something that's worth developing out and sharing with the team. So, normally I would do in a real sort of, this was a real assignment. I would do more than 2 examples here, but these are 2 examples that we're going to hypothetically choose between. I think the first example is a little bit stronger. Scalability is one thing to consider at this stage, especially if you're working on a live service game that will probably have quite a few updates over its lifetime. So for this exercise, let's go with this layout as we'd have an easier time adding more categories to the tabs. We can get some longer item names and descriptions in here. There's a lot of space in the upper left corner of the screen in case we need to add more widgets. And overall, it just feels more open and less claustrophobic than this version. This version might be cool if the player had some sort of like tablet or device that they needed to pull up that tied into the fiction heavily, but it feels a little bit more constrained as a design. One adjustment I had to make coming from mobile casual into AAA was designing around high fidelity visuals. Both in-game and the front-end menus can be challenging to find a good balance between like overly simplistic UI art and UI art that can compete with the on-screen visuals. As visuals in games have gotten like more realistic over time, the accompanying UI tends to have less high frequency detail, and that way it creates more contrast. I'll talk a little bit more about this later in the presentation. One way of approaching this on the UX side is to work on a hybrid of a mockup and wireframes together. If I'm working on a front-end screen that's going to have a high-resolution 3D model that's animated, that's going to have realistic lighting, I like to place something comparable in my wireframe so I can get a better sense of what my UX is going to have to complement in a real-world setting. In In actual production, I would go into the engine, set up a character, put them on a table, use our lighting, and get myself a bunch of screen grabs to stub in. That can take a little while. I could probably spend an hour or two, maybe more, doing that. For the sake of this presentation, I just spit out an AI generated chat GPT image. And that's what this is. And then usually when I get that sort of stub in or backdrop, we'll need to do a pass for legibility. Vignettes are a nice way to help with readability when you have a lot of high frequency detail in the background competing with the UI text. Sometimes we use blur shaders as well to help reduce background detail. Blur shader is just it's a shader you can put over certain areas of the screen to kind of Gaussian blur the background out a bit so you can help with text legibility. In this example here, I just use simple dark gradients on a multiply layer on the background. Most UI editors let you anchor these in the corners or different regions of the screen. Moving on, I'll start to add complementary color to the menus and some visual treatments to help try and understand my visual hierarchy a little bit better. One of the challenges I've found with working with just gray box or wireframes is that you can kind of get an even visual hierarchy on everything that may or may not translate to what ends up shipping in the game. So it can be helpful to try and work through some of those issues early on while you're creating the UX spec. There's a big caveat here where a lot of these elements are usually in flight and production at this stage, so it can change a lot, and the art pass can end up going in a completely different direction. So you could spend all this time on your UX side of things, arting it up a bit, and then a lot of that work can get thrown out. But I've found it to be helpful for problem solving the visual hierarchy on screens. So it's the way I like to work. Progressing the design a bit more, adding a crafting material cost widget. As you start to get closer to where you feel like you're getting at a good spot to start building out the flows, always check down your visual hierarchy. Give it a squint test. Squint your eyes, see what's popping well on the screen. Where do your eyes go first? How do they move around the screen? Sharing with peers for feedback is good at this stage too, because everyone's eyes sort of behave differently. That's why getting a larger sample size of feedback can be helpful. When I'm starting to feel good about a particular direction, I start, and I'm sharing the ideas around with the team and the UX director and some stakeholders. If things are in a good place, I'll start to build out all the screen flows and use cases that we'll need for a full spec. The screen flows are basically how do you navigate around a series of screens that are in a particular use case. So for example, if the use case here was how do I navigate through the different craftable items in the menu, press left or right on the D-pad or the left analog stick to move left or right through the selections. You can see on the top here, I'll put a little button mapping in between the flows to show how you get back and forth. And then the way it's usually set up in Figma is you set your flows up left to right. On the left, usually highlight the use case in a title card or whatever means you like, and then build out your flows left to right and split them by use cases. Typically the flows move left to right, but depending on how complicated they can get, they might go up, they might go down, depending on how your screens flow. If they get too complicated, it might be better to consider splitting out a new use case, because you always got to keep in mind that these docs, your specs, have to be referenced and viewed by many folks on the team. So the easier they are to sort of grok at a glance, the better. It's we usually have a kickoff where we walk folks through the UX spec, but just the way development works, people might get pulled on later. Uh, Folks from other studios might need to reference the docs, so the easier they are to understand, the better. This is something I like to do. I like to add a terminology slide in my specs. I find this helpful because there tends to be a lot of overlap in the terminology we use in games, where different folks might use different terminology for design elements and widgets than I do, or like Treyarch, our team might call something, one thing, and then another studio might call it something else. So having a slide like this will help get everyone on the same page with identifying all the elements in the design. So when we have meetings and are referring to something, we're all on the same page. At this stage too, I'll usually give it another look. I'll give it to my director and any key stakeholders before I make annotations. The reason I hold off on this step is it involves a lot of writing, and in this case, in case there are many edits, I don't want to have to rewrite all my annotations. I usually save that to the end because it's my least favorite part of the design process, but it's also probably the most important. Annotations should ideally explain the use cases being presented in the wires or mockups and act as a reference point for the engineers and folks who will be implementing your design specifications. These can also include important information regarding color hex codes, tunables, pixel measurements, font sizes, etc. However, depending on your studio, that might be handled during the UIR process. Sometimes not all these callouts are necessary, but it's a good practice to have all this stuff documented for reference for anybody on the team. Once the UX design spec is in a good place, it's good to have a kickoff for the design and walk everybody through it and take questions before it gets handed off for implementation. I also want to note that there are some roles where the UX designers are expected to do the implementation, but my talk is going to proceed under the assumption that UI engineering will be doing the implementation. Depending on the project, the UI art pass could happen now, or the feature can just be built with engineering art, which is just which is basically just temporary assets. And then you might get a UI art pass later after implementation is done. In my opinion, that's preferred. My reason for this is that implementation can be where a lot of compromises come in due to tech limitations, miscommunication, other in-flight designs, or just time constraints. And creating nice UI art can take a lot of time, so it can save both yourself and the company time and money by living with some temporary assets while the user experience is fleshed out. Then doing a polished art pass on everything when it's in a good place on the UX side. There are, of course, exceptions to this. For example, if you're building a UI that requires a lot of complicated 3D assets, or conceptually really depends on the art to sell the overall experience, then it's worth it to build the art in parallel. I want to stress that as a UX designer, your work is not done once you hand off your specification for implementation. As the designer, it's your responsibility to shepherd the design implementation along and make sure everything is to spec. Regular playtests and check-ins with the engineering team are required to call out anything that is not to spec. No matter how good your UX spec is, you as the designer will always understand the UX design and be able to catch items that other folks will unintentionally miss. This is one area, even on a large team, that you can take ownership and help facilitate the implementation of your designs. At times as a design owner, it can feel like you're being nitpicky or pixel pushing, but it's important to provide the necessary feedback to get it as close to the original design as possible. I want to talk a little bit about context and contrast. Um, it's always useful to look at your UI UX assets in context. And what I mean by that is if you're working on icons, for example, always view them at scale and in context to where they will be viewed on the screen. This will help with legibility and help you balance out the right amount of detail you will need when these icons are viewed in game. I recommend doing this with all UI assets. For example, if your icons are going to be 64 by 64 pixels in game, it doesn't make a lot of sense to review them at 512 by 512. You're just not going to see all that detail at scale in the game. I'll run through a hypothetical minimap icon example here. The icon on the left, these are, let's just say these are night vision icons. The icon on the left, while it's really cool, like for example, might not be the best choice for a minimap. Depending on the level of detail in our minimap, that high frequency detail and color might just get lost on the minimap art. The simple vector icon on the right might be a better choice here. In this example, I went with like a gritty, detailed minimap. The rendered icon just gets lost on here. It's really hard to find. You can kind of see it over here. It's in sort of the top right portion of the minimap. Whereas, the simple vector icon reads a lot clearer on this style minimap. If your minimap was a lot simpler, you could use rendered out icons if that's a direction you and the team want to go. It works a lot better here because there's just not as much detail on the minimap. Although, I don't know, I'd probably still go with the vector version, but that's a personal taste. The reason it's good to do this too is a lot of times icons are outsourced on large development teams. So it's important that you provide context to the artists that are going to be working on these assets so they can deliver against what will be seen in game. I want to touch a little bit, like I mentioned earlier, on just UI presentation. Over the years, as in-game visuals have advanced so much, it's pretty natural that the UI treatments have gotten a bit simpler in presentation. It presents a nice contrast and helps the UI stand out a bit against backgrounds, against as in-game visuals have gotten more advanced and detailed, having that more simple, clean UI, it pops more on the screen. Battlefield 2 on the PS4 came out in 2017. It's one that always stuck out to me. I remember seeing it at the time and thinking, it was a fairly simple, clean UI, but it popped really, really well on the in-game visuals. The example on the left here is Battlefront 2 on PS2, and it's a little bit harder, to see the UI, especially if you do a squint test compared to the more modern version on the right. Yeah, it just had a nice balance. There's light treatment on the HUD. That's something to look forward to, or sort of look into while you're doing UI art. Is like, how can you add light treatments that fit within the theme of the game and the narrative, but aren't too overwhelming? Older games, I think the God of War example here is good. If you look at God of War 2 on the PS2 in the upper left here, the PS2 era of games had a lot of visual flair on the HUD elements. Older games used to do, some of the heavy lifting of the visual presentation on the HUD. um, since the in-game 3D visuals were still evolving at that time. The newer God of War games do a good job of balancing like a little bit of flavor with usability and contrast. If you squint test uh, the older game with the newer one, I think the newer one's a lot more successful. The bottom example, contextual HUDs are also something that a lot of games are doing now. This example, the combat HUD is hidden when you aren't in combat. It shows the compass, which is needed for exploration. So it's another thing a lot of, you know, um, studios are doing is like, how can HUDs and UI be more contextual? Especially for narrative-driven cinematic games, that's important. And finally, like I think Diablo's always been a good example of a game that's had like a very thematic HUD. And they evolved this quite well. I mean, they still do, if you look at Diablo 4, they still do a like pretty thematic heavy HUD, but it's adapted really well. I think it's actually a lot more successful than, the older versions. If you squint test, I just think it pops a lot more, especially with the art direction on the in-game visuals now. Switching gears a little bit, I want to talk about accessibility. Accessibility has become a huge part of our workflow and presents a lot of unique challenges. Over the years, taking Call of Duty, for example, we've added so many accessibility options that sometimes one of our biggest challenges is just finding the setting you are looking for. We have an accessibility subsection in the settings, but even then, finding exactly what you need can be challenging. We've added a search to help aid players to locate specific settings. But this can be challenging as well if you don't know exactly what you're looking for. I think this is an area that we need to improve as an industry overall. A lot of games now place some of the main accessibility settings on a screen at the start of the game to aid players, which is great. I'd love it if console manufacturers could help you set up like a global profile of your accessibility preferences, and then that could automatically be carried over to the software on the platform. For example, selfishly, I mean, I'm a person who plays with Y inverted in every game, and I have to set it in every game, and it'd be nice to just globally set that at the platform level and have it just work in the games. I'm going to walk through another example of how I would approach accessibility. In this example, we're going to look at an in-game loot card with a rarity system for a hypothetical fantasy game. Let's start with color. I mean, color is pretty much universally used as a rarity indicator in most modern games. So for this example, we're going to go with a common rarity for the examples, which is blue. It's a blue color. So first, we'll start with just making a blue card. And then the in-game item will also have complementary blue colors. But for colorblind folks, this would not be ideal because we're relying solely on color to message rarity here. Taking it a step further, in addition to color, we can always add text to help reinforce the rarity to players. So at the top of the card on the right, we add, common rarity, reinforce the color again. This is a nice addition, but we might also have folks with reading disabilities, or maybe the game's not localized. So taking it a step further, we might also want to introduce some iconography that also reinforces an item's rarity. And here you'd want to take a look at unique silhouettes for each icon to help with differentiation at a glance. Usually, they would get progressively more complicated as you moved from common to epic to legendary. Most games have more than 3 rarities. It would probably be base, uncommon, common, epic, legendary. Um, and then, taking it one step further, on the art pass, you can tie it all together with unique art touches, and a consistent design language can help players differentiate or ID the necessary information. Also, it's good to remember not every player plays games on a monitor like a foot away from their face. A lot of folks still play, on the couch in their living room. So making sure everything looks legible on multiple setups is a good practice. Same goes for handhelds and smaller screens. It's usually a good practice to review your work on multiple devices if applicable. And talk a little bit about feedback and iteration. Um, Feedback comes from everywhere. Internally, we get a lot of feedback through playtests from everyone on the team, along with regular peer reviews and formal reviews with stakeholders. The best advice I like to give folks who are new to UI UX is just don't ever get too attached to your designs, as it's not uncommon to throw out a lot of good work and explorations. It's all part of the process and journey we go on shipping a game. The time spent on these, however, is not wasted. There is so much to learn and take away from going through different designs and flows throughout the development of a particular feature that it's not uncommon for an interesting idea from a scrap design to later get revisited in a different feature. So we make it a practice to keep all the iterations and use cases handy in case we need to resurrect an older design. I put this kind of funny meme image here, but it's so true. A lot of times you will start with design A, and then you'll go through all these design iterations, only to end up back at design A in the end. And that's just part of the process, is taking a look at all the what ifs and possibilities. And sometimes, yeah, your first design is the best one, but it's not uncommon to go through that whole process of doing multiple designs and end up back where you started. I recommend monitoring internal playtests. Look for consistent issues that keep tripping people up. This can help you stack rank which needs the most iteration. You're going to get a lot of feedback. Some of it is, personal preference comes up. Some people, like, for example, might hate the color orange. That's still valid feedback, but, you got to kind of stack ranking, like what's coming in over and over again is really important. To just not get overwhelmed. There's just always so much feedback to address on especially a live service title. Outside of Treyarch, there's no shortage of feedback. Reddit and YouTube, there's like unlimited amounts of feedback at these places. As painful as it can be at times to read through Reddit and YouTube comments, it can be hurtful at times to read unfiltered commentary, but the feedback can be invaluable to improving the game and the user experience. It's impossible to address all the feedback, and some feedback, like I said, can have bias or personal preference, so it's important to look for common pain points that players are frequently running into. One of the benefits of working on such a large franchise is that there's never any shortage of passionate feedback, both positive and negative. It's good to try and monitor these channels regularly and try to stay ahead of the curve, and identify the current product shortcomings, and keep those in mind for future projects. There's always another Call of Duty to come down the road, so if we can't get to it this game, we will try and get to it on the next one. It's also a good resource for getting bug callouts that make, we want to make sure we're tracking these internally. Most of the time we are, but some stuff, we only find through the community. Um, and along with the negative comments, it's great to see positive comments and player hype, which can always be nice and satisfying to see when you work on something for such a long period of time. Um, do I like doing what I do? Um, while there are a lot of unique challenges working on such a long running franchise, I really do still enjoy working on Call of Duty. Um, being such a large franchise, there's a lot of hype and marketing around launch time. We can always get a ton of user feedback on the game during the beta and post launch, just due to the sheer volume of players that we have, and the amount of folks that engage with our products, on social media. Um, good or bad, I think the passion is good. The worst feeling is when you launch something and the audience is indifferent about it or doesn't care. Um, what can be challenging is looking for ways to be fresh and innovative in a franchise that has been going on for nearly 25 years. A lot of times I'll think I have this really slick idea, and somebody will mention how we already tried that in a past Call of Duty and players hated it. So, um, you have this library of ideas that we've just, had over the years. So it's always handy to have. Um, working within the constraints of the franchise has its pros and cons. Sometimes it can be really comfortable to work within a box. It can keep you grounded and helps you focus, but it can also feel suffocating at times. But at the end of the day, I still wake up and I love working with the folks I work with and solving these challenges and trying to find new interesting ideas to tackle, and hopefully we'll continue to delight our fans and contribute to the overall legacy of the Call of Duty franchise. Um, I'd like to open it up for questions or feedback, but I want to mention you can if you email me, you want me to take a look at a portfolio or give feedback, you got any questions, feel free to email me. My email's open. You can also find me on LinkedIn. I'm available on there. I am not active on social media. I tried to avoid social media. I have a little bit of social anxiety, so yeah, I guess I'm maybe not the right target audience for social media. But yeah, I'm not really available on there. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and open up for questions and feedback.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jason. This was amazing. Thank you so much for taking the time and putting all the effort in those slides. I mean, you know, it's quite amazing that you were very generous with your time. So thank you so much for this. I think
Uh,
a lot of people probably learn a lot from this talk. So, I mean, that's the goal. So, but yeah, so we're gonna open it up for some questions. I see that Tiffany, you have a question?
Yes. I think my biggest question that I've been kind of wrestling with with a little bit has been kind of recommendations for navigating uh, the current market that's going on right now for UX. That's been kind of my hardship for the last like 2 years or so. And I was wondering if you had any advice for people that are kind of in this market dealing with trying to move into UX or game UX.
yeah, that's a great question, Tiffany. Like you all, I've been, following a lot of the news around video games, and there's been a lot of consolidation in the past few years. There's been layoffs. That's something we always, even on a successful franchise like Call of Duty, it's, we're not immune to layoffs at Activision as well. So yeah, the market is kind of in an interesting place. I think a lot of money right now is going into AI, which would have been invested in other things in the past, like game studios or other tech. But unfortunately, right now that's the hot new thing, and less money is going into games or funding game projects. Um, you know, I would say if you love this, then pursue it. You know, and that's kind of where I was at too. Was like that's all I wanted to do was work on video games when I was younger. And you know, my early jobs in gaming, I could have made probably more money working elsewhere, but that's what I wanted to do because I had a passion for it. Um, I also think like if you're breaking into the industry, like we still do an internship program at Treyarch that's really excellent. It really is good. I mean, we bring in a new crop of interns every year, and we usually end up hiring a great deal of them. So internships are still like a valid way to sort of get in, learn, get your foot in the door. Um, I also think now more than ever, also, there's so much free online learning for everything. So, I mean, you're taking this awesome class, you know, that Stefan teaches. That's an excellent resource, and then you can take the skills there and adapt them in different areas. Moving on, you know, if you want to learn new software, there's you know tons of stuff on YouTube to learn for free. Um, yeah, that's kind of where I'm at is just like, yeah, keep learning. If you're passionate about it, keep pursuing it, and do it, you know, if you love it. But it can be a hard, challenging industry to work in for sure.
If I may, I'd like to piggyback on that as well, just to add my 2 cents. I would say like another factor is like what's going to get through the door is going to be your portfolio. So this is why like this class is really focused on a portfolio piece because nobody really cares which school you're going to or which certificate you got. Like what's gonna really land you is your portfolio piece. So and if you want to do a UX portfolio, then you need to do some case studies. And but if you want to do like visuals, you got to focus on the visuals, right? So again, like this is why also like people are going to hire you because of your skill set. So if you can do like UX, UI, motion graphics, and even an implementation, and then implementation into Unreal, into Unity, those are all factors that, the bigger the problem that a studio wants to solve, the more money you're going to get and more stability you're going to get. So just keep that in mind as well, I would say. But definitely, it's like, and we've all seen these cycles, like in 2010, we went through a recession. This is only temporarily, but I will agree with Jason, though, on the fact that a lot of resources are being focused on AI at this current time. But there will be a period that things get readjusted and things will, calm down, hopefully. But remember, like 3 years ago, it was on the news that people were quietly quitting. Basically, what was happening during COVID is that people had multiple jobs, you know? So that was a trend that happened. And I feel like what we're going through right now in the last couple of years is that this is a new trend, which is on the negative side, obviously, you know? So yeah, it's really unfortunate that but you got to think also that the PlayStation 6 and the new Xbox is just around the corner. They will need to have game developers to create new games on those because you can't have sales of hardware without any software. So, and it takes like several years to build an IP on a new technology such as the PlayStation 6 and Xbox. So hopefully this will turn around quick, sooner than later. But hope, you know.
Yeah, those are great points, Stefan. And there's a couple more things that I also want to add or piggyback onto that is, you know, also take every interview, even if you don't want the job necessarily, because it gets you used to interviewing. and you get used to telling your story. And you'll start to pick up on what's resonating with folks and what's not. It's always good practice to stay like fresh doing that, and it's a skill you got to develop. So like even if you might get an offer or someone might reach out, hey, I don't really want to do that. Just go through the process and get used to interviewing. A lot of it too, in addition to your portfolio, which is super important, is your ability to communicate with teammates and problem solve on the fly. So also doing that will get you in the habit of like answering questions you might not be prepared for, and solving problems. Like some interviews will make you work through a hypothetical on the whiteboard. And just also to prepare you, video game interviews are kind of grueling. Like they're like 6 to 8 hours long, where you're just, two folks from a discipline are coming in. It's like a half hour, 40 minutes each. There's usually a lunch break. So just mentally prepare yourself that like it's a marathon, not a sprint. So also I think that's why it's good to hone your interview skills. It's like, I don't know, video game interviews are so long. They're intense.
And I'll just say one more thing. One thing that I've done in interviews, and honestly, I've seen a lot of positive feedback on this, is that once, I've been in the industry for quite some time, over 25 years. One thing I've noticed is that you get these recurring questions throughout interview process. So what I've done actually, and I said, it has really helped me out in a positive way, is that I prepare a slide deck. Now, when I go into an interview, I do not impose on the people like, "Hey, I have this slide deck. Do you want to see it?" I kind of like, the way I word it is like, "Hey, I don't want to take over this meeting, this interview, but if you like to, I do have a slide deck that could take about 5 to 10 minutes of a presentation. Would you like to see it?" And if they say no, we are, we're doing this, doing that, totally fine. I would say, honestly, when I word it that way, it's always 100% yes. They want to see it. And through my slide deck, I will talk about who I am. The most important thing is going to be the process. People want to know, what is your process going from UX to UI to implementation. And in my slide deck, I do talk about that a lot. I talk about what are my aspirations, what are my motivations. Like, it's not all about me. It's about like, what can I bring to the table, and what are my skill sets that I can bring to help you grow and solve some issues into your studio. So maybe think about doing a slide deck as well. And if you want to, Tiffany, I'd be more than happy to revise that slide deck with you at one point. So maybe something to think about. All right. Ethan, you are next, my friend.
Thank you. And thanks again, Jason, for your talk. I wanted to ask early on, you mentioned as far as sometimes looking for references and sources for inspiration. I'm curious as far as, do you mainly look to other games in the genre? Do you also sometimes look to sources outside of games for inspiration as well when it comes to either the UI, UX design? Because I've sometimes seen in the past UI, UX designers also talk about like experiences they've had outside of games, things that were maybe a little gamified, and seeing how they can bring that into a game experience. So I'm curious, either on a personal level or at least with your experience, what that's been like.
That's a great question, Ethan. So as time has gone on, I mentioned that in my deck earlier because a lot of my peers do that. I don't really do that step anymore. And it's not because, oh, I've been doing this long, I don't need to look at reference. In some ways, I find, especially in the AAA space, we've been doing a lot of things. There's like a lot of homogenization of the UX experience overall. So I'm kind of trying to like not look at things, and to your point, look for inspiration elsewhere. The biggest inspiration I always get is just traveling. It's not even design really related. Every time I travel to and see a new culture, see new people, I just get inspired and reinvigorated to design again. And so I've been drawing a lot of inspiration from that. A lot of times too, it's just stopping work. Like, I'll start something, hit a wall, and the best medicine for that is to just get away from it for like, about 16 hours or so, and then revisit it. And then I'll start to see things there that I didn't see earlier. Um, I do think it's good to look at games for reference. I mean, I tend to play like every big release, and most games out there that are sort of in the zeitgeist of everyone's conscience at the time.
Right.
And then just like it's playing games for years. I kind of understand like how menus work, how things work. So I don't really gather as much screen reference as I used to. I don't think that's a bad thing though. Like I still think it's like really helpful for folks to do that. But yeah, I tend to look elsewhere for inspiration these days.
Understandable. Thank you.
Yeah, you got it.
Cool. All right. Next, we get Abigail. You're muted. Okay.
Yeah. Hi. I was wondering, how do you keep up with the UX trend?
How do I keep up with the UX trend? I just try my hardest. I'm getting a little bit older now. I've been doing this for a while, so I just try to usually try to look for ways to, take what I do and see if there's new ways to adapt it. For example, I've been messing around with Runway AI, which they have these things called workflows, which are basically kind of like, I want to say like state machines, but I was like looking for ways to automate maybe certain organizational tasks that I have in that. And, a lot of it is just looking at ways to use these new tools and how can I factor them into my workflow now. In addition to that, it's staying current on all the latest games and what other studios are doing and seeing what the trends are. Playing a lot of games, doing a lot of research. But I also love learning new tools. I love when something new comes out and just diving into it and learning it and watching a lot of YouTube videos. I remember when Figma first came out. It was actually, I started using Figma, Stefan, at Servios. It was around that time I remember I was using, what was the other one that was like?
WXD.
It was XD. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that was the go-to. I completely forgot what it was called. But I remember, switching. I was just thinking, wow, this is great. Like, this is such a great tool. And it was really exciting. So I really get excited about new tools and how I can incorporate them into my workflow and and sometimes I hit a wall. Like I was really trying to dig into Runway and these workflows that they have, and I couldn't figure out anything. I spent like a whole day well, maybe it can do this, maybe it can do that. And the whole day I couldn't really find a good use for it yet. That's not to say I won't find something that it's useful for, but that process was at least kind of exciting and fun to sort of, again, I like exploring and not knowing if something's going to work out. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I just kind of dabble in everything.
It's all good. I was wondering also, what is the last game that inspired you?
Well, I mean, I just finished Resident Evil Requiem. Really
You finished
awesome.
it? You
Yeah,
finished it? Oh my
it's
God.
not a very long game. I think
Okay.
it's like just under 11 hours was my playtime. But I mean, I was inspired by it from like just a presentation standpoint. They did such a great job on the presentation. The UI was really well done. I always like their inventory management because it's like a little mini game in and of itself, like arranging things in your inventory. Yeah, that inspired me. I got I get inspired by other like I really like the new Game of Thrones show. I thought they did Night of the Seven Kingdoms. That inspired me. I thought that was really well done. Music always inspires me. Like I'm always looking for new music. Yeah. And then usually it's like the latest game that came out that everyone's talking about. Now I'm playing Slay the Spire 2. I really like Slay the Spire, the original, so checking that out now.
Cool. Excellent. Farek, you are up next, my friend.
Yeah. Hey, thank you very much, Jason, for the presentation. I would like to ask, are there any AI tools you can use or you already integrated in your workflow to help with designing?
Yeah, I mean, like all of us and probably like a lot of different industries, I'm still navigating that. It's all moving so incredibly fast. Um, I haven't really seen anything like this in a while. I started messing around, and for me, like where I'm finding it the most useful, at least personally, is for things that it's mostly like presentation aspects of UI UX that I would have spent a lot of time maybe kit bashing a background together that I need to stub in under certain lighting conditions. Like I mentioned before, you know, if I was doing this on, at my day job, it would make more sense for me to go in and do it in the engine, get the actual exact lighting and everything, and set up a scene and import that. But for, like the example I did earlier, like, I was able to spit out a background image for that would never be shippable. Like we would never ship that, but just for getting the idea across in the UX and how it would work on a, hypothetical screenshot. Like I find that useful. We all need icons all the time. So, for our job. So icons, as you know, come in various styles, sizes, levels of detail. It's good for testing stuff like that. Like what would this style icon, would it work? Would this style icon work? And finding that can help you sort of iterate faster. Again, we would not ship those, but it would help in some of the problem solving. And then, actually, like I use the AI probably more in my daily life for things. I just got an MRI on Friday, and then I got the report back on my phone, and I had no idea what it was telling me, so I put it in Chat GPT, and it explained it. I'm still like, I'm not gonna replace my doctor with Chat GPT. I'm still gonna make an appointment and assess my MRI. But it was cool to like get a breakdown of what I was looking at ahead of my doctor's visit. Also, like trip planning, it's kind of great for that. Like when you're planning a trip or vacation, it's really helpful for that. So, yeah, I'm just like everyone trying to navigate this and figure how it fits into my life and possibly work as well.
To piggyback a little bit on that, what are your thoughts of people putting AI work in their portfolio?
I think it's fine if you just make it known that it's AI. If you're trying to deceive someone and say, "Oh, I created this from scratch," or "I created these icons in Photoshop," then that's not great. But if you're upfront, like, and it's like citing your sources in like a book report. You got to just be upfront and transparent about what tools you used and how you did things, and I think that's um, it's an interesting bring that up because we haven't been really actively interviewing candidates more recently since this has become like more of a thing. So I'm kind of curious, like that's probably going to come up in like future job interviews that we do at Treyarch. So yeah, it's got to be sort of something we consider and look into. But yeah,
Yeah.
just be upfront about everything. I think it's fine.
Yeah, I agree with you. There are some studios out there, just for full transparency, there are some studios out there that if they do say AI, that, they will not go move forward with your candidacy for that particular job.
Yeah,
So
and
it's, you got to do your research and, so
yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, look, there's really strong opinions on both sides of pro AI, anti AI, but I think it'd be also good for the studios to just be upfront, like no AI, and then you can tailor your portfolio around that. I mean, a lot of times that's what folks do with their cover letter and
mhm.
everything anyway. So it's, you
So
know,
to piggyback on what you just said, Jason, I'm just kind of curious, how do you customize your portfolio, right? So like if you have a website, I mean, I have my own personal thoughts on this, but like I've seen people do PDFs, for example. I've seen people do Figma presentation. So how would you go about doing personalized portfolio for
well,
studios?
it's a the reason I laughed is I'm like like I remember when we started this, you're like, "What's your portfolio?" I'm like, "I don't have a portfolio. Like I had one years ago, but I stopped paying the thing because I had a job, so I didn't bother updating it. If I was going to do it now, and this is just me personally, like I'd probably move my portfolio to Figma and just share a link and because Figma has pages, you can navigate around, you can do flows, you can do annotations. Like, I don't know, I might just have a Figma portfolio rather than a website, to be honest. I don't know. Like, I haven't had to think about it for a while, but that's probably where I'd go. Um, you know, yeah.
Yeah, you're so fortunate for that.
For now, like, who knows?
Yeah, yeah, no, I agree. Frank, you had a follow-up or another question?
Yeah, another question tying into this topic. Do you recall any kind of like seeing anything impressive from someone who applied at a position like a game UX designer position who didn't come from the industry but working on general applications for mobile or anything like that? And if you like, have you ever had a person hired with that kind of background? And do you recall anything impressive from either their portfolio or anything impressive they showed during the application process?
Yeah, I want to say less so at Treyarch, but when I was working in mobile and social games, we used to get a lot of folks from other industries or maybe worked on product design in tech that wanted to transition into like social games were like a really hot thing for a minute. Farmville when Facebook and uh, MySpace, if you remember that one. They used to have a lot of these browser games. It became like this really big thing, and it was making tons of money. So there was lots of folks from different industries. You would get engineers that were wanting to do UX, and uh, folks with business degrees wanting to work in the space. We more so, I think, at Treyarch, we probably, and I think this was before my time, but I think we had a few folks that were working on UI from film, and specifically, they were, known for their FUI elements, which is like fake UI. It's like all the number. If you think of like Iron Man, like when he puts his suit on and there's all these readouts, like I don't know if maybe they actually do something, but it just looks cool. So there's always a need for that, especially like when you're selling a fiction. in a video game is just having things that look like UI that are somewhat faked, along with like real UI and UX. So I do think that translates over, and I think at some point we did have some folks on the team that came from that, but everyone that we have now is pretty much like more traditional, like working in games, doing UI UX. But yeah, I mean, I don't want to say we you know we might see someone from some career we never thought of that like adapts over really well, and we're just amazed or blown away and can see a lot of value they'd add to the team. And I think motion design is another one where there's always room on a team for a good motion designer, someone who can like take the UI and the static screens we make and just make them sing with animation and transitions and all that good stuff. So that's like the extra level of polish. If I think back to some games that do that really well, I mean, Hearthstone always, pops into my head as a game that really did like really great transitions, and the UI and UX felt really tactile. Hades does a really good job of like transition animations between their menus and stuff. So yeah, a really good motion designer who might not really be thinking about UI UX that much, but knows how to take elements and animate them and transition them on a screen like that. That's always really valuable to a team.
Yeah, that's why, like, for those who have not taken the class as of yet, in the master class, like today is class 10 with my current cohort. And after that, we go into the speedometer, which we're going to transition to FUI design and then also motion design. I always say that FUI is, it's a good return on investment because it's pretty easy to learn and how to, implement it. But also, like, I always say, like, motion design is something that's a very underutilized skill set. As I was saying earlier, it was like studios will hire you because of your skill set. So if you can basically showcase that you can do UX, UI, motion implementation, I think that makes you a highly valuable candidate. So, definitely something to think about as well. So, but you're
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
And on top of all that, it can also, if you sort of do it through a UX lens, you can use it to your advantage. Again, to like, if you're transitioning into a screen, it can help reinforce the hierarchy, the way stuff animates in, and then the order in which it appears on the screen can guide the player's eye a certain way. So there's like a lot of thought you can put into motion design that can actually, aside from presentation, be used to your advantage.
Yeah, exactly. Because what's the alternative? The alternative is you do everything in game and into the engine, and then you have to work in parallel with a UI engineer doing all the logic, and then like where you can do in After Effects, you can do it in 1 day or 2 days, and then compared to if you do in the game engine, that could take you several weeks. And I know that because I've actually done that with like the age of scale form. So for those who don't know what scale form is that back in the days before Unity in Unreal 4 we would have to use Adobe Flash to basically do all of our UIs, and then Scaleform would be the middleware. Have you ever used Jason Scaleform? I'm just kind of curious.
No, I use Flash, but never scale. I never
Uh,
got into scale.
yeah, well, you didn't really use Scaleform, but you used Flash, and then the middleware was basically Scaleform, and then the engineer would like convert all your Swift from Flash into the game engine. There was like a lot of problems with skill form. It had a lot of memories issues. But my point is that, uh, yeah, it's just like, yeah. So basically, skill form was great at the time. But like, if you can basically like learn all those skill set, like motion and all this stuff, it's just so much better. And doing it in After Effects compared to using an engineer, yeah, it's much, much better. Oliver, you have a question.
Yeah, sure. Hello, everyone. And this might be a similar question to the previous one. I'm a UI UX designer from the tech industry, a product designer. I already have like a portfolio, but it's like attached to that, right? So how how common is that you get portfolios, or should I like make my portfolio about gaming UX UI, or can I leverage my portfolio that is attached to product design to get into the gaming industry?
I would show what you think is your best work, whether it's in games or whether it's in tech or any other type of product design. Um, a big component of who we look to hire too, in addition to again, it's like problem solving. Like UX is a lot, it's mostly problem solving and figuring things out on the fly and being able to iterate fast. So if you have work that demonstrates that, or case studies that demonstrate that aren't game related, that's fine. It doesn't hurt to have like a lot of game stuff on there as well. But I think it's the quality of the work and the problem solving that we're looking at. So it doesn't have to be all games.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I would say like because I've done guest speakers with like Mila Palvin, for example. And she comes from a background, she was the lead UX designer over on God of War Ragnarok. And I believe if I'm correct, she actually worked worked at Nokia, if I'm not mistaken. But I want to say that God of War was actually her very first game as a UX designer, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe she's worked in gaming a little bit before. I don't recall exactly, but it is pretty common, especially for UX designers, that they come from another industry and then they jump into games because it's not like you can until the UI Peeps Masterclass. There's not really a career path where you can be like, okay, I want to get into video games and be a UX designer. A lot of these boot camps out there, they're basically our product design, where you're going to learn a lot of like HCI and stuff like that, where just, human interaction, psychology behind all this, which is very useful. But if you want to get into game design specifically, it's a bit of a challenge because I would say the UX maturity in the game dev space is quite low. And unfortunately, we still deal with a lot of game studios out there that they think that UX is UI and UI is UX, that it's the same thing, which obviously it is not. But we all know this because we're all professional and we've been working in this industry for quite some time. So it is really frustrating that, we are still uplifting that this battle of like, no, these are two different disciplines. But again, it's been kind of like the known thing, unless if you work at AAA studios, like for Jason, for example, all he does is UX all day, every day. But if you were to work at a medium-sized studio or a startup, it would be expected that you will be doing UX, UI, motion, implementation. So, but the problem is that, and this is my personal take on this, is that during COVID, there's just been a lot of boot camps out there that were promoting, like, hey, if you want to make a lot of money, take this Figma class and, pay us thousands of dollars for this. And what actually ended up happening was that UX became oversaturated. And so when you see a UX position over at Riot, there's going to be like 200 candidates for that position because a lot of people want to get into UX. But the reality of it is that yes, Riot will hire UX designers, and all you're going to do all day, every day is going to be like UX. But 80% of the game dev space is double A studios, startups, where they will ask for a UX and UI designer. So you have to be a hybrid of that. So, but again, that's my personal take. You may or may not agree with me, but it's been my experience myself. So,
Cool. Thank you.
yeah, no worries. All right, anyone else? Frank, you got another question?
Question, yeah. Jason, do you feel like Figma is enough to do all the UX work that you need, or do you still go to any other tool?
It's not enough. I do a fair bit of motion design as well, so I still work in After Effects pretty regularly. Photoshop still, there's certain visuals that I can't achieve in Figma that I'll need to go over to Photoshop for. So I'll work back and forth a lot between Photoshop and Figma. I haven't touched Illustrator in like 7 years since I moved over to Figma, and I never ever want to go back to Illustrator again. Some folks use Miro as well. Like Miro is a nice tool. It's kind of, you know, used more by I would say like the game design folks. Whereas like the UI UX team primarily works in Figma. Other tools. Those are primarily the main things I work in, to be honest.
It's funny because like I love Illustrator and I prefer Illustrator over Figma all day. It's like, yeah, but each your own, right? Whatever gets
Yeah.
the job done,
Yeah.
So like I've seen shit that's been done in Figma and I was like, holy cow, how did you do that in Figma? It's like it's mind-boggling. Like, but I feel like the new generation of UX UI designers, they basically jump to Figma a lot quicker than, but I don't know. For me, I just like to use Illustrator, Photoshop, Figma.
Yeah, work with whatever works for you,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Is it Felipe? Did I say that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Hey. All right, awesome. You go ahead, man.
Okay, hey everyone. So I've been working with I worked with mobile games before for 5 years, and now I'm developing RPG, a turn-based RPG with a US company, and um, there is this discussion where um, I know where that UX is not only UI, and even in the team there is this mess sometimes. But the designer, the lead designer, he knows this difference very well. And oftenly, because I used to work with mobile games, it's very much um, basically wireframing what the product design team defined, and you basically create wireframes and the UI for it later, but you don't get too much deep in the UX or the player experience and like enhancing features to make the UX something huge. It's just a product. Sometimes it's just okay. They just trying to making a lot of money from it. And right now in this currently experience in this RPG, it's being asked more of this UX approach to give the player some experiences, and sometimes I struggle a little bit to understand what I can bring of it because I was too much used to just to wireframing and else. So, is there any hints you could give me to explore more this UX feeling for the player thing? That's it. That's
Yeah. I mean, this is all, that's a really interesting question. I would say there's a couple things to this that got me thinking. First, prototyping in Figma can help you get a feel for where the UI UX is going really well. So if you have any like really cool ideas, building out prototypes in Figma, and putting it on device can give you like an early, and you can pass that around, share it at the studio, and get people on board with your idea, especially if it like is resonating and feeling really good. The other part of that, and this may not have been where your question was going, but it might be worth mentioning here, is that sometimes studios don't really, as smaller studios might not have a process, like a really defined UI UX process in place. And as you know, if you're one of the only folks doing it, you can help define that and educate them on like what should we be doing here, like how like we should be doing, you know, like a wireframe pass, a prototyping pass, a mock-up phase, implementation, and just helping establish a pipeline if they don't have a really well-defined pipeline. And this is, again, probably more for indie studios, smaller studios, AA. AAA is probably going to have something in place already, and you're going to slot into something specifically. But that might be something to consider too, is just helping them define how they're going to create great experiences in you know, your product. But I would say prototyping, like doing rapid prototyping and feeling how it's going to feel on device might be a good way to go there.
And then user feedback, you know, put in front of people's faces so they can, because like you never want to be perceived as difficult to work with, right? But if you present facts that's saying like, hey, during playtest, we had this issue, then people are going to be like, oh, okay, now I'm paying attention. You know, it should never be about your feelings. It should be about the facts. So that's why user testing is super important. And then you can, you know, if you're lucky enough to have a QA department, ask them to like test your prototype in Figma and get that feedback. And you want that raw feedback as well, you know? So, all right, Anna, you're next.
So, so I come from a background more of development, and I've been trying to increase my skill set with UX mostly. And for this masterclass, I've been doing this portfolio piece that I wanna to do like a research with users and try to get this feedback. But I'm trying to understand like what level of detail can I give them? Like in Figma, for example, if I build a prototype, can it be like this gray box and they're not understand and I take like the not understanding part out of it because it's gray box? Or how can I filter the feedback? Or if I even just like make like more detailed screens so they can understand what they're doing. I'm trying to navigate that.
Yeah, couple thoughts here. So we do user research at Treyarch. I didn't really touch on that in my presentation because it's a whole separate department, and then they run their tests. We can watch them. We do watch them. We can watch their eye tracking, all that stuff. But the most helpful thing we get back is they'll compile all the data for us and put it in a nice PowerPoint. And then we can go through and action on the items we need to. So it's not something me or my department really does much, but I can share with you that if you are doing a prototype, especially like rough prototyping, it's really good to make sure you have I don't want to call it a cheat sheet, but it's kind of a cheat sheet, like letting them know like what they're going to be doing, the context of the prototype, and especially the controls, because you know, especially if you're working in Figma and you're if it's controller based, you know, there's a lot of buttons. You got to basically create a button mapping for the players who are going to be testing your prototype, and some context of what it's for, just so it's, you know, not just getting a bunch of gray box stuff moving around. So usually we will do that with our rough prototypes yeah, just provide a document that explains what it is, how you use it. And then from there, I mean, if you don't really have like if you're doing it yourself, you gotta kind of take a look at both where players are kind of looking on the screen and how they're interacting and what's tripping them up, and look for And this, you generally don't even have to look for this. It just naturally happens that you'll start to see, oh, players are getting stuck. Like all the players are getting stuck here at this one step, and it's a real problem that we gotta like look into solutions for. And then again, you sort of stack rank all your data that you get back. Like everyone was having a problem here. 6 players had a problem with this, and 4 players were this, and then you'll get usually with user testing also at the end you ask the group a bunch of questions. What did you think of this? What did you think of the difficulty? And you'll get answers back, and that's also helpful to sort of go through and read their personal feedback. And then also it's really good to just get a sampling of players. Are they hardcore players? Are they casual players? Are they first-time players? And to sort of understand what type of players are given different feedback is helpful, to make, some decisions around, well, this game is not, hardcore players get it, but nobody else does. The casual players are really getting tripped up, and the first time players are getting really tripped up. So if you want to have to reach the largest audience possible, you're going to want to address those concerns.
Agree.
Thank you.
All right, anyone else? So we are good. Again, thank you so much, Jason, for your time and your generosity. It was amazing. I really enjoyed it. And yeah, so you did an amazing job as well. So thank you so much, Jason. And thank you all of you for coming and attending this presentation. For those who have not taken the class yet, I'm eager for you guys to start this learning journey with a masterclass. And yeah. So anyways, but again, I'll put the last slide of Jason where his contact information on the UI Peeps alumni channel. So if you want to add him on LinkedIn, or you want to send them an email, I will send that information to you guys momentarily. Okay?
Thanks everyone for, taking time out of your Sunday. Yeah, it was really great speaking with you all, and maybe we'll end up working together in the future. I look forward to seeing you out there, and please don't hesitate to reach out with any questions or feedback or anything. Always open.
Sounds great. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Have a good one, guys.